All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're taking a closer look at the Science of Identity Foundation, SIF for short. You might have heard of them. They've been in the news quite a bit, especially with their connection to, well, some pretty prominent figures like Tulsi Gabbard and a business called QNet that's been stirring up controversy.
Definitely a group with a lot of layers.
Yeah, so today we're going beyond the headlines. We really want to understand SIF, their history, the controversies, and how all of this impacts the lives of their members. And we'll be focusing on some devotees from, well, places like Poland.
Yeah, those are some of the stories that really need unpacking. We're going to be looking at some pretty serious accusations against SIF, from cult-like practices and financial exploitation to, well, even potential political maneuvering.
Oh, wow. And I guess at the center of all this is their founder and guru, Chris Butler, who also goes by Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa.
Right.
Now, those are some pretty, weighty titles in the Hindu tradition.
Yeah, for sure. Sannyasa and Paramahamsa, those titles suggest a life of renunciation, where you're giving up worldly possessions and attachments in pursuit of spiritual liberation.
So basically, we're talking about a spiritual leader who is supposed to be detached from material things.
Exactly. But, and this is where it gets interesting, the image that Butler projects and the reality of his lifestyle, well, they seem to clash. We have sources, including former members of SIF, who describe him living a life of, well, luxury, involvement in business ventures, and control over significant wealth. And, that seems to contradict the whole renunciation thing.
Yeah. I mean, how do those two things coexist? A renounced spiritual leader with a lavish lifestyle. It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
It's a question a lot of people are asking, especially when you hear accounts from former SIF members.
Yeah.
They describe instances where Butler actually demanded significant financial contributions from his followers, sometimes like up to 50% of their income, all while presenting himself as someone who's renounced wealth.
Hold on, 50%. That's a huge chunk of someone's earnings. I can only imagine what kind of impact that would have on his followers, especially those who might be struggling financially.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it like for, say, the SIF devotees in Poland, where a lot of people face economic hardship?
That's a really crucial question, and it's where things get pretty troubling. We have accounts from former members in Poland, and they paint a very stark picture of the financial pressure they were under. They were struggling to make ends meet, yet they felt this obligation to give such a large portion of their, hard-earned money to Butler. And there's this one case, a particularly heartbreaking one, of a Polish devotee who tragically lost a child amid all these financial difficulties.
It's just awful. It really makes you question, like, the level of sacrifice that was expected from these followers and the potential consequences of all of this.
Yeah. And this pattern, it really deserves a closer look, especially when you consider that the financial aspect of SIF doesn't stop there. There's also this connection to a multi-level marketing company called QNet.
QNet? Oh, okay. Now that's a name I've heard before, and not necessarily in a good light. How does this company fit in with SIF?
So QNet has faced a lot of accusations, running pyramid schemes in several countries and even having some legal trouble because of its business practices. And what's interesting here is that a key figure in SIF, a guy named Alan Tibby, who also goes by Akariades, is deeply involved in QNet's operations.
Wait, so we have a high-ranking SIF member connected to a company accused of pyramid schemes. How did that not raise any alarms within SIF?
Well, that's the thing. From what we've heard from former members, SIF had this really strong culture of silence and obedience. Questioning Butler or his close associates, that was strongly discouraged. And if anyone did speak up, they often faced a lot of pressure or even, ostracization.
Wow, so it was this situation where they were pressured to give a huge part of their income to this, quote, renunciate, who's living a luxurious life. And then on top of that, he's linked to this company with a really shady reputation. It's starting to sound like, well, a textbook case of exploitation.
It certainly raises a lot of concerns. And those concerns only deepen when we look at the boarding school Shawd. SIF ran in Baguio City, Philippines.
The school. Tell me more about that. I'm curious how it all ties in.
This school was meant for the children of Butler's followers. They presented it as a traditional gurukula, which is a type of Hindu residential school. But the experiences of former students paint a very different picture.
What kind of experiences?
Well, there are former students like Koviak and Ranson who have spoken publicly about the school's conditions. They talk about strict discipline, isolation from family, and a heavy emphasis on obedience to Butler, even though he wasn't physically there at the school.
It sounds so isolating, maybe even traumatic for those kids. Were there others who corroborated these accounts?
Yes, other former students who wish to remain anonymous have shared similar stories. They describe an environment where critical thinking was stifled and there was this, constant fear and dependency on Butler and his teachings. It creates a very disturbing image of potential control and manipulation within the school.
Ugh. This is getting more and more unsettling. Were there any other issues with the school besides the harsh conditions and the, well, potential for manipulation?
There were. There are actually accusations of child labor at a drug factory connected to the school.
A drug factory. That takes us to a whole other level. What kind of drug factory are we talking about? And what's the connection to the school?
We don't have a lot of details about the factory itself, but, just the fact that these allegations exist raises serious questions about the ethical practices, not just within the school, but within SIF as a whole.
It's just mind-blowing to think that while he was demanding all these financial contributions, Butler might have also been profiting from child labor. It's beyond reprehensible. And then, to make things even more complicated, there are also these sexual abuse allegations against a student named Siddha.
Yeah, this is where things get even darker. Bellord was a student at the school, and according to other students, he held this, privileged position and was often seen as being above the rules. The accusations describe disturbing incidents of sexual abuse towards younger boys at the school.
That's just horrifying. Were these allegations ever investigated?
Details about any investigations are scarce, unfortunately. We do know that there was an incident where Bellord was found to have a sexually transmitted disease, and he reportedly admitted to visiting prostitutes. But the really disturbing part is how the school staff responded. Instead of addressing the abuse, they focused on interrogating the boys about whether they had told anyone outside the school about what happened.
That's outrageous. They were more concerned with covering it up than with the safety and well-being of the children who were entrusted to their care.
It's a deeply troubling situation, and SIF's lack of transparency about the school and the allegations against Bellord only adds to the concerns about their practices.
This deep dive has already uncovered some really troubling aspects of SIF, and we haven't even gotten to the Tulsi Gabbard connection yet. I think we need a moment to just process everything we've learned so far about Chris Butler, the financial pressures on his devotees, and that deeply concerning situation at the school in Baguio City.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crucial to take a step back and recognize just how serious these allegations are. We need to approach this information critically, recognizing the potential for harm and the need for further investigation.
Couldn't agree more. We'll dive into that Tulsi Gabbard connection and the wider implications of SIF's influence when we continue our deep dive.
Welcome back.
We're back, and wow, that last part about SIF was pretty heavy stuff. All those accounts from the school, the financial demands, the QNet connection.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, and it really does raise some serious questions about how SIF operates and, the potential for harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're moving on to the Tulsi Gabbard connection. Things are about to get even more, complex. Tulsi Gabbard, she's a pretty recognizable name, former congresswoman, presidential candidate, and she's been quite open about her ties to SIF, which, has sparked quite a bit of controversy, especially in the political world.
Right, and her connection to SIF goes way back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, her father, Mike Gabbard, he's a prominent figure within the group and a vocal supporter of, Chris Butler and his teachings. And Tulsi herself actually spent time at that SIF school in Baguio City as a teenager.
So it's not just a casual association. Her family's been involved with SIF for years.
Exactly.
But how did this connection play out in her political career? Did it have any real impact?
Well, that's where things get a little murky. We have evidence that Gabbard and her family received substantial financial support from SIF members for their political campaigns.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, it raises some big questions about potential influence.
Yeah, I imagine people would be concerned if their elected officials were, potentially beholden to a group like SIF, especially with all the controversy surrounding it. It definitely raises concerns about transparency and possible conflicts of interest.
For sure, voters have a right to know if their representatives' decisions are being influenced by outside groups, particularly ones with, questionable practices.
Right. So did Gabbard ever address these concerns about SIF potentially influencing her political decisions?
She consistently denied that SIF had any undue influence on her political stances. She maintains that her decisions were based on her own values and, the best interests of her constituents.
So we have these two conflicting narratives. On the one hand, there's financial support from SIF members going to Gabbard's campaigns.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, she's denying any undue influence. It's a situation that leaves a lot open to interpretation. It just goes to show how important it is to be, critical consumers of information, especially when it comes to religion and politics mixing like this. There are often so many layers that need to be carefully examined.
I agree. The Suf story really highlights how religious groups, especially those with charismatic leaders like Butler, can exert influence in ways that are, well, pretty subtle and hard to define.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant. Ask tough questions like, what are the motivations? What are the potential consequences? Who benefits from all this? And these are questions we should be asking, not just about religious groups, but about any organization or individual that's trying to exert influence.
That's a really good point. Whether it's a political party, a social movement, or even a brand, we need to be discerning and really look critically at the information we're given. Can't just take things at face value. Got to look beyond the surface.
Exactly. And I think another big takeaway from all of this, from the SIF story, is the power of speaking out. If it weren't for those former members who bravely shared their experiences, well, these questionable practices might have stayed hidden.
It speaks volumes about their courage. Sharing these kinds of stories, especially ones involving harm or injustice, can be incredibly powerful.
It's like that saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly. Transparency and open dialogue, they're essential for holding people and institutions accountable and, well, preventing abuse of power.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into SIF, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Be aware and be critical. Whenever you encounter a group, especially one that demands total obedience, significant financial contributions, or isolation from loved ones, those are huge red flags. It's crucial to be skeptical, ask questions, and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, don't hesitate to walk away. Your well-being and your autonomy are what matters most.
That's such an important message. We have the right to choose our own path, and no one, no matter their spiritual authority or position of power, should be able to exploit or manipulate us. And with that, we'll be back with the final part of our deep dive into SIF, where we'll explore even more insights and reflections on this complex and controversial organization.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm still kind of processing everything we've learned about SIF. It's like every time we peel back a layer, there's something even more unsettling underneath.
It's definitely been a journey, that's for sure. We've seen how they operate, the controversies, the allegations of exploitation and abuse, and of course those questions about their influence on people like Tulsi Gabbard. But there's another side to SIF that we need to explore. It might surprise you.
Oh, okay. Lay it on me. What haven't we talked about yet?
Well, think about how SIF presents itself, their image. It's not just temples and traditional gatherings. They've actually kind of woven themselves into everyday life in some pretty unexpected ways.
Really? Like how?
We're talking yoga studios, health food stores, even cartoons. Wait, cartoons? Like for kids?
It sounds strange, right? But yeah, they've used all kinds of media, animation included, to get their message out there and, well, potentially attract new followers.
So it's like a way to reach a wider audience without people even realizing they're being exposed to SIF's ideology.
Exactly. And it seems to be working. They've attracted a pretty diverse group of followers, people looking for spiritual guidance, a sense of community, or even just a healthier lifestyle.
That makes me wonder, how do they manage to draw people in, especially with all the red flags and controversies we've talked about? What is it about SIF that people find so appealing?
I think it's a few things. Butler's teachings, they often focus on self-improvement and finding inner peace, and that can be really attractive to people who are searching for meaning in their lives. And then there's the community aspect. SIF provides this really strong sense of belonging, which is especially powerful for people who feel isolated or disconnected.
Right. And then there's the charisma factor. Butler comes across as this wise, enlightened leader, and people are naturally drawn to those kinds of figures, people who seem to have all the answers.
Exactly. And that's where things get a little tricky. Because when you have a leader with a devoted following and a system that discourages critical thinking, it can create this environment that's ripe for abuse.
So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important message is be aware, be critical. When you encounter any group, especially one that demands total obedience, big financial contributions, or isolation from family and friends, those are massive red flags. Be skeptical, ask questions, and trust your gut. If something feels off, walk away. You are responsible for your own well-being, both spiritual and material.
It's a good reminder that not all spiritual paths are created equal. Some groups might seem great on the surface, but there could be a darker side underneath.
And it's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about creating a culture where people are encouraged to think critically, to question assumptions, even when it comes to those we respect or admire. We need to look beyond the charisma and the promises and see what's really going on.
This deep dive into Seth has definitely been eye-opening, and I hope it's been the same for our listeners.
It's a reminder that even in the search for spiritual growth or a sense of belonging, we need to be careful and make wise choices.
Well said. That's a wrap on our deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation. Stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for joining us.